Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, August 5th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics president and co-founder Tom Bevan and RCP White House correspondent Phil Wegman. So, guys, Russiagate continues to heat up. Attorney General Bondi has instructed the Justice Department to start legal proceedings, and she's ordered a federal prosecutor to prepare evidence for a grand jury. It's not clear at present exactly what the charges would be, nor who would be charged. But the general question seems to be whether Obama administration officials committed federal crimes when handling the intelligence about what Russia did or did not do to influence the 2016 election. So, Tom, what do you make of Bondi's latest move?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, we don't know what the charges are. We don't know who's going to be charged, for what possible crimes. I mean, look, I do think this is an area of legitimate inquiry that needs to be investigated. And to the extent that people did things that were criminal, they should be held responsible. Now, I think we don't know. We're not there yet. We're learning more about, what was done. Certainly, it seems like, John Brennan perjured himself when he talked about the Steele dossier before Congress. And there are issues like that I think where there might be some criminality involved. But I think the Justice Department, they have to be careful with this. They can't just be seen as sort of, just going on some sort of fishing expedition. I think they need to come forward and say, look, here's exactly what went down and the criminal activity. Here's who's responsible for it. And this is what we're going to charge them for. And it doesn't look like they've done that right now.
Yeah. Phil, what's going on with the White House with this? I mean, this seems to be, Donald Trump was on television this morning and said that he had nothing to do with it, but that's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe. When I pressed the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, as well as White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on this question of who exactly was going to be referred for potential prosecution and where they wanted this thing to eventually end up, they were very vague. They talked about accountability. They talked about pursuing truth. And we see something similar in the move by the Justice Department right now. No one's named. We don't have a prosecutor in place, but even with that said, they're recommending a grand jury here. This is different than the normal DC churn where there are investigations into this and that. I think there's a lot more momentum here, especially after the documents that were released by Gabbard. And we mentioned Brennan and Clapper. Certainly this White House, they know that former President Obama, he has immunity himself. In fact, this administration, they were pushing for Trump to have broad immunity at the Supreme Court. But some of the underlings, for lack of a better term, they don't have immunity. And this White House absolutely wants to see, maybe a pound of flesh. And I think that now they have evidence. They have this whistleblower who says that they were actually pressured to change their assessment. So it's a different kettle of fish. I think we're, not even at the beginning or the end of the beginning, but it's, something to watch.
Yeah. How important is the whistleblower aspect of this, Phil? I mean, because that's the new wrinkle. But that's again, something we hear about Washington all the time. There's always a whistleblower. It's a totally overused phrase anyway.
Yeah. So up until the release of Gabbard's documents here, the 2017 House Intelligence Committee's report, there had generally been a shorthand reference to the consensus by the intelligence community that Russia not only meddled in U.S. elections, but they did it on behalf of Donald Trump so that he would win. The difference in these documents now is everyone agrees that Russia meddled. The question is, who did they meddle on behalf of? And these documents show that the Russians allegedly had evidence that Hillary Clinton was in sort of an embarrassing mental state. And the thought was that they were holding on to that to hamstring her presidency later on. Now, the whistleblower that you mentioned a second ago, they run counter to this claim from Brennan and Clapper. Just recently, both of those gentlemen were in the New York Times saying that the allegations from Tulsi Gabbard that they pressured anyone to change their assessment was patently false. That's the phrase that they used. Now you have this whistleblower who says, that's exactly what happened. I knew that they were meddling, but I didn't think they were meddling on behalf of one candidate in particular. And I was pressured to change my assessment.
Well, Tom, the criticism, of course, is that this is all just to try to deflect people from either the economy or the Epstein case in particular. And that what's going to happen, they'll issue these subpoenas, they'll try to embarrass people, but at the end of the day, they're not going to obviously get President Obama. And it's more than likely that they might get indictments, but they probably, convictions are going to be awfully hard on this sort of thing. So is this really just an exercise in trying to deflect the American people from what's going on at the White House?
It certainly has that aspect to it. The Epstein files are still, that story's still out there. And you mentioned the economy, but I also think that can be true, but it can also be true that this is an important subject. This deserves investigation, and it does deserve some accountability. The idea, and again, I agree with you. I don't think Barack Obama's, and we talked about this before, the people who are, sitting there waiting for him to be frog marched, in handcuffs, it's not going to happen. But to the extent that this was a coordinated effort on behalf of members of the administration, and Joe Scarborough was on this morning saying, "Oh, this is give it up, Republicans. There's no there." And Michael Steele was saying there's no evidence of this. We've run clips of both of those folks on our website, by the way, along with folks like Molly Hemingway and folks from the right who are saying, "Look, this is explosive new information that deserves investigation." I think I fall more into the camp of it's worth looking at and asking questions and trying to figure out exactly what happened, because I think there was a certain evidence and certain degree on the part of members of this administration. They accepted this narrative. They believed this narrative that Russia was trying to help Trump and meddled on his behalf. And then they sort of basically, I don't want to say concocted evidence, although you might use that phrase, right? But that's the narrative that they decided on, and they pushed out through official channels and leaked to the media, who was a willing participant in this. Yeah. And to the extent that stuff was untrue or made up, that's a huge scandal. That deserves to be investigated, and to the extent that people can be held accountable, they should be.
Well, Phil, some other news today. House side, the House Committee, Oversight Committee, subpoenaed Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. And every attorney general going back to the Grant administration, it seems. I looked at the list. It was really quite extensive. Again, is this just grandstanding, or are they really going to get the former president and the former Secretary of State to come talk about the Epstein case?
Well, this one is much more targeted than whatever the Department of Justice is doing. There's actually, folks who are getting subpoenaed to appear before Congress. I'm not certain whether or not they're going to get Hillary Clinton, but my suspicion is that former President Bill Clinton is more than happy to talk, perhaps not about this issue, but to resume his time in the spotlight. I think the really interesting thing, you mentioned it, Andy, is not just Bill Barr, but also Jeff Sessions, having both of those attorney generals back on Capitol Hill to talk about this. The politics here are interesting, because what we're seeing now is one of the things that is uniting both the Democrats and Republicans who are showing up to these town halls is they want answers on Epstein, despite President Trump saying there's not much ado about anything here. They want answers. And I think that, Comer and House Oversight actually saying that they're going to get to the bottom of this shows that there's a little bit of daylight between the president and his majorities in Congress.
Yeah. Tom, you see it that way?
Yeah, I think so. This is an issue that, again, as much as Trump has tried to make it go away, it's not going away. And it's not going away because people, including his supporters, are still fixated on getting some transparency. There are still questions to be asked. And the Trump administration hasn't done a good job of answering those questions, nor have they done a good job of sort of being forthcoming about, the files and what's there. Apparently, it looks like Pam Bondi might release the transcripts of the Ghislaine Maxwell interview. And there was some other news about Ghislaine Maxwell has filed a suit. She wants to keep the grand jury stuff private. So, and again, we've talked about this too. Some of this has to do with federal judges who are who have kept this stuff under seal. There are a lot of different parts to this story that make it maybe less than easy for all of this information to come out. But I certainly think Comer's willingness to issue subpoenas to all of these folks means that this is an issue that is going to stay in the spotlight. Again, we'll see how much, it might just be more heat than light, but we'll see whether, if they get people to come before his committee, whether we learn anything new about this.
Yeah, I want to see that Maxwell redacted statement. It's just going to be black lines, black lines, black lines. You might get a few prepositions, but no names.
Real Clear Politics exclusive. We'll run it on the front page.
Yeah.
That's right. Tom, Democrats are trying to figure out how to handle the candidacy of Zoran Mamdani up in New York. Here's Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren on what she thinks of Mamdani.
You know who hates freezing the rent? Real estate moguls. Some of the people hosting the big ticket fundraisers for Eric Adams. And you know who doesn't like paying their fair share in taxes? Well, the Wall Street billionaires bankrolling Andrew Cuomo's campaign. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Zoran Mamdani is New York's best choice for mayor.
So she's made up her mind. And someone asked, if Mamdani is what the Democratic Party should look like. She said, "You bet." That's one of her stock phrases. But not all Democrats are enthusiastic. Chuck Schumer, Kathy Hochul. Cory Booker did not endorse. He said this. He said, "New York City, I love you. You're my neighbor. You're about 10 miles from where I live. You guys figured out your elections. I'm going to focus on mine." So it seems like there's a little bit of a split screen in the Democratic Party when it comes to Mamdani. What's your take?
You think Cory Booker's running for president? Look, Elizabeth Warren, all in. She had a press conference with him, and you mentioned, she said, look, this is the Democratic message. This is what it needs to be, which is as full-throated as you can possibly imagine. The New York Post ran an unbelievable front page headline this morning, which if you haven't seen it, if you want a good chuckle, you can go check it out. It says African American meets Native American, which I'm a fan of the New York Post and their wood, as they call it. Yes, yeah. They're usually pretty good. But no, it highlights exactly the problem that Democrats are having with Mamdani and the split, between the progressives who want socialism and or even more than that, as Mamdani has indicated at times, or the folks who think, look, we got to keep our distance from this stuff, from what's going on, the mayor in Minneapolis, or the nominee there, mm-hmm. and tack more to the center. And again, it's not a fight that's going to go away, because you've got Bernie and AOC and a bunch of these progressives that are really pushing hard, and they've got the energy behind them. I mean, we've talked about this before too. You look at the amount of fundraising that's done. The folks on the left are raising huge sums of cash, and so this is going to continue until eventually it will be, well, we'll have a mayoral election, which will settle at least that piece of it. But this is going to continue on through the 2028 nomination, all the way to when the voting starts, and Democratic rank and file members get to choose for themselves. Do they want to move to the left, or are they more interested in trying to tack back to the center? And so this is an ongoing fight that's going to continue for some time.
Yeah, Phil, how do you see it?
More and more, I'm looking at Biden's years as an unsatisfying intermission. This is the same fight that was had between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 2016. We're a decade removed, and it's ongoing. You have some, like Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who talked to us just the other week about how she thinks that the majority of the country is actually in the center, that the online left is not representative of her party. But to Tom's point, if you look at all of the fundraising energy, if you look at the rising stars, they are the New York mayoral nominee and AOC and Elizabeth Warren. There's a lot more flash, and it seems energy on the far left here than in the center. So it's going to be up to them to figure out, where do they actually stand. And I don't think that, they're going to have a satisfying answer until the next Democratic presidential nominee. Until then, you better bet your bottom dollar, though, the Republicans are going to do everything humanly possible to make this guy the face of Democrats. It's going to be nonstop ahead of the coming midterms and ahead of 2028.
He's running a pretty good campaign, though, Tom, and that's one of the things. I mean, when we talk about Bernie, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you saw Elizabeth Warren's endorsement. I mean, I just think she needs to be coached. She's so terrible when she does those kinds of statements. But Mamdani is smooth, and his sort of mastery of social media. You can't fault him for this. That may be one of the big differences. I mean, this guy and people like him really know how to campaign in this day and age, and to reach those marginal voters that's the whole thing may be about next time around, right?
Yeah.
Correct. And he ran a great campaign initially, and he is very savvy and charismatic, and he sounds really good on the stump when he talks about his ideas. They really do appeal to, I mean, who doesn't want to make the city more affordable? Everybody wants that. And so
who doesn't want government-run grocery stores?
Well, Elizabeth Warren wants them. She said we need to experiment with stuff.
That was a good. That was a nice little touch there, that we would experiment with this.
Right. Yeah, they experimented with it in Venezuela. Ask them how it went. No, but and you couple that with the problem that Democrats have is you have Cuomo and Adams, who are two very, very flawed candidates. I mean, if you had a single candidate representing sort of the other side, the centrist, who was a good campaigner, then I think it would be a really, really interesting fight. But right now, I think Mamdani's, gonna cruise to victory, because the other side, these two candidates are so flawed, and unless Eric Adams can somehow, really leverage the issue of crime in his favor, or events somehow intervene that tilt this race in his favor, right now the political dynamic is favoring Mamdani, and he's going to win. And as Phil said, then he really does become the poster boy for Democrats, and he's not going away, and he'll be part of the 2028 discussion. Not him running for president, but everyone who's running for president in 2028 will have to basically, come to grips with, are they in favor of him and what he's doing, or are they opposed to it?
Yeah. Hey, guys, I want to talk about this other story, because this is so weird, and it's irresistible for me, though. This Jim Acosta, who used to be on CNN, he has a podcast now, and on Monday night, last night, he interviewed, I put that in air quotes, what he was described as an AI-generated version of one of the students who was killed in the Parkland shooting back in 2018. So the parents of the student, Joachim Oliver was his name, were behind this. And here's just part of the conversation between Acosta and this AI.
Joaquin, I would like to know what your solution would be for gun violence.
Great question. I believe in a mix of stronger gun control laws, mental health support, and community engagement. We need to create safe spaces for conversations and connections, making sure everyone feels seen and heard. It's about building a culture of kindness and understanding. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea, Joaquin.
What's going on here? Is this journalism? Is it helpful? Is it a harbinger of things to come?
It seems much more like an episode of Black Mirror. I mean, I think Jim Acosta needs an editor. The journalistic ethics here are skewed. Why would you quote someone who is not alive? Certainly, I know it's an AI language model, but it raises all sorts of ethical questions. Is that actually what this young man would have said? Or is that what his likeness and some computer algorithm are spitting out? I know that Acosta had the blessing of the family, but this is incredibly strange. And it certainly should not become a practice among journalists. I mean, if you want to go to a museum and there's some exhibit where, you can interact with, I don't know, the ghost of Abraham Lincoln, and it spits out, factoids or AI generated responses, that's one thing. But this is the victim of murder. And now he's being his AI likeness is being trotted out to make a point. It all seems very strange to me. And I personally would not have done that interview, and I don't think we would have published it.
Yeah. Tom, what did you make?
Oh, we definitely wouldn't have published it, Phil. There's no question about that. Carl's not here today, but I can tell you, I feel very comfortable speaking on behalf of Carl that he thinks this is like creepy as shit, and not good journalism. I mean, where to start? And Acosta teased this as some sort of revolutionary thing. It's really, really disturbing to me that he's interacting and portraying. I mean, it's almost the definition of fake news, right? He's interviewing someone who doesn't exist and who is, pre-programmed to give responses about gun violence. And I mean, it's so creepy and so wrong on so many levels. And, I didn't see a lot of outrage about it yesterday. Maybe there was some today, but like, just imagine if let's say, the parents of Laken Riley decided to create an AI image of her, and Republican, some reporter was like, let's interview her about, illegal immigration and illegal migrant crime in America. The Democrats would lose their minds. I mean, is this where we're headed? The slippery slope. We're just going to start, pulling dead people out to give these sort of, these ideological speeches about whatever their issue is. I mean, I agree with Phil. I mean, to the extent that you're using this technology in sort of a historical context, and you want people to, if it's part of a museum, an exhibit, something teaching people about history or whatnot, fine with that. But this is way, way beyond that, and is really disturbing. And hopefully, Jim Acosta is roundly criticized for it, and there's pushback so that this doesn't become, anything close to the norm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, his father, he did this interview again, whatever it was, he did with this AI generated thing. So that's sort of a parlor trick. I mean, it's just a technology, and, kind of gross. But what was touching, his father was talking about it afterwards and said that the kid's mother likes to talk to that AI thing, to hear the AI say, "I love you." So it's heartbreaking when you consider what this family has gone through. And so I'm not trying to make light of that at all. I mean, they lost their son at the age of 17. He would have turned 25. We should remember Parkland, and we should honor the victims and their families. But at the same time, it does seem like, just like Acosta said at one point, I really felt like I was speaking with Joaquin. It was just a beautiful thing. And even when you listen to that little clip, it was not. It was like talking to some AI chat GPT,
Totally.
Piece of off-the-shelf software. Really not even that sophisticated. So I struggle with it, because I wonder where this points us, though.
So in like the 19th and 20th century, we ran through this with soothsayers and with, sort of what they were doing after these great wars where you had bereaved loved ones who were trying to get in touch with the dead. And they were really popular. And then they were roundly condemned because you're supposed to let the dead die in peace. I mean, it's a metaphysical conversation here, but that computer and that computer generated image and voice is not a human being.
Right.
And my heart goes out to that mother. She lost her child in a tragedy, but this is a very unusual, uncanny valley here. And I think that beyond just the question of journalism, we're gonna have to struggle with this as a society, because you can understand the temptation of wanting to talk to a lost loved one, but they're not real. It's a voice in ether.
Yeah, no, I think Phil said it perfectly right there. And we've seen these stories about people, who fall in love with their AI, their series or whatever. It's a disturbing sort of idea. And I agree. I mean, heart goes out to the family, and totally understand all of that. But again, to be bringing these folks, trying to bring them back, virtually to make political points or to push ideological points, is, and portraying them as if they're living, breathing people that you're interviewing is just, again, it's so far beyond where the line should be, I think. And hopefully, as I said, I don't think we need legislation or anything, but certainly this is not something that we want to be part of our current sort of news lexicon.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Phil. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Richard Porter. He's a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Mr. Porter, good to have you back.
Great to be here.
So Illinois is once again at the center of drama with these Texas Democrats who are camping out here. J.B. Pritzker had a press conference with them today where he talked more about basically saying he's going to stand up for their values. The DNC chairman, Ken Martin, posted a video. He flew into O'Hare this morning. So, Richard, what do you make of this situation? Democrats clearly think this is a winning issue for them. Although, as I talked about yesterday on the program, I'm not totally sure that's the case. I'm not sure how this ends for them in a positive way, other than just a piece of sort of performance art.
Well, that's a great point. And remember that Illinois was also the sanctuary back in the standoff between Democrats and Republicans in Scott Walker's era, when they ran away to try to stop some of the sensible policies that Walker was implementing in Wisconsin to bring the government to heel there. So it seems like Illinois is the preferred sanctuary for Democratic power politics. And there's a good reason for that, Tom. That's because, nothing the Democrats do, they don't do it anywhere as much as they do in Illinois. Let's put it that way. Illinois is the hotbed of really bad ideas for the Democrats. If you look at our map is absurd. I mean, from an Illinois point of view, this is great because it shines a spotlight on the absurd gerrymander that was imposed on the people of Illinois, so that only 3 Republicans out of 18 were elected under the congressional map that they passed. So, I mean, my goodness, for J.B. Pritzker to be talking as if redistricting for political purposes is a bad thing, you're like, hello. I mean, it's like an arsonist decrying arson. It's absurd.
Yeah, and you look at the map, and this has been getting a lot of attention because of the sort of irony, hypocrisy, whatever you want. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of, no self-awareness on the part of Democrats. I mean, we have districts in this state, Richard, that are, as you said, just they're ridiculous the way they're drawn. I mean, there's one, the 13 sort of crawls up from St. Louis all up the middle of the state, and then you've got
like a worm.
Yeah, and then you've got another district that's wrapped around that, and you've got, especially in the sort of northern, Cook County suburbs, you've got these crazy lines that have been drawn to maximize Democrats. And I was looking on, these are D+20, D+30, D+35 districts that they've basically sort of ensconced themselves in. Probably not the best. Illinois probably not the best messenger or example when it comes to decrying the woes of redistricting.
Correct. That's exactly right. I can't imagine a worse state for them to come to make this point. The unctuousness with which J.B. Pritzker brings these points up, it's just breathtaking. But I think the people of Illinois are saying, oh, well, wait a minute. I mean, so from my point of view, as an Illinoisan upset about the way this gerrymander works, I couldn't imagine a better place for them to come, because it highlights this for us. And if you look, all of the districts around the city of Chicago, they have these ribbons coming out that, these convoluted patterns coming from the center of Chicago out deep into the exurbs to combine a concentration of Democratic voters with voters who would otherwise be Republican. So they've gone way out of their way to effectuate this. Now, it's important to realize, Tom, that both parties in the redistricting fight are using the Voting Rights Act as a basis for their complaints. What Texas is up to today is actually an outgrowth of a Democratic lawsuit brought against Texas. The Biden administration commenced a lawsuit back in 21 alleging that the current maps were illegal racial gerrymanders, and they were backed by a private lawsuit. The Trump administration came in and they dismissed that thought. They dismissed that suit, the Department of Justice's participation in that lawsuit, but they followed up with a letter with an opposite theory about how racial gerrymandering was used inappropriately by Texas. So it's always the Voting Rights Act, which is the football that's being used to justify these political gerrymanders. Now, the Supreme Court has announced that it's considering in a Louisiana case whether or not this use of the Voting Rights Act is appropriate or whether it ends up violating the 14th Amendment, which provides for equal protection without regard to one's race. So there may be a great step forward coming out of all this fight, Tom, which may diminish the ability of states to ignore the requirements in their own constitution that the districts be compact and contiguous and kind of reduce the use of this racial tool to play political games.
Richard, I mean, one of the complaints obviously is that, and J.B. Pritzker said this in his comments today, that the Texas Republicans are trying to change the rules in the middle of the game. And obviously this is a mid-decade redistricting, which this has happened before, but it is kind of rare. I mean, I guess the argument Democrats would make was, well, we at least waited until the proper time to do our gerrymanders, but this is because, Republicans are worried they're going to lose a House. And so they decided to, jump in the middle of the game. What about that argument that this is being done, the timeliness of this is what is offensive to Democrats?
Well, the Democrats were themselves trying to change the redistricting plan in the middle of the decade through their lawsuit that was initiated in 21. So had the Democrats won the White House, they would be using that lawsuit as a cudgel to force Texas to redistrict in a way that's more favorable to the Democrats. So it's completely bogus. It's a ridiculous argument because the Democrats themselves were trying to use the law to redistrict Texas in the middle of the decade. It's just that they don't like how it's turning out, so now they're squawking the other way.
What about, Gavin Newsom said this is going to trigger redistricting in California. Kathy Hochul has said something similar in New York, that this could set off a redistricting arms race around the country. I mean, I don't know. Certainly, Illinois, you really can't gerrymander it any further. There's no more blood to squeeze from that stone politically.
They did the ultimate gerrymander in Illinois. It is impossible to do any better. There's just absolutely no way.
But what about these other Democratic states sort of retaliating?
Well, the constitutions in both California and New York have specific provisions regarding how the redistricting is supposed to occur involving an independent commission. So the idea that somehow they're going to have to go back and redo those maps would be ignoring their own constitutional provisions that empower a commission to do this work. So I don't see how they do it under their own laws unless they change those laws or disregard them. Now, the issue you have in both California and New York is the judges are all Democrats there too. So it's a bit like Chinatown, the fix is in with Jake, it's Chinatown, man. So there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on. But I mean, the idea that the Democrat response to this is to say, well, we're going to do more of our own, but we're more pure than you are, is like, what? If you were pure, you would start calling for the use of this technology to generate more competitive districts. I mean, that's the reality. With computing power, they're being used right now to create these hyper gerrymanders that you couldn't have possibly done without the benefit of the computers. You could do the opposite, and you could program a computer to maximize area relative to circumference. That's a way of describing compactness, and also to track geographic boundaries like rivers or towns. So, I mean, you could come up with really beautiful competitive maps using computers if you ignored and refused to include data about partisan voting or the racial makeup of the people. But
part of the problem is neither party really wants that. I mean, I don't think Republicans would necessarily go for that. But let me ask you this, Richard. We got about a minute left.
We would in Illinois for sure.
Yeah, in some states, yes, sure.
We would in Illinois.
I'm not sure Republicans would love that in Alabama and Idaho, but whatever. What about this idea that the Texas House has issued arrest warrants? Ken Paxton has said that they need to be basically arrested and thrown in jail. The full force of the law brought against these folks who have skedaddled out of Texas. What about that? I mean, is that legitimate to arrest these folks, and beyond that, is it wise politically to do that?
The Texas Constitution empowers the Attorney General to acting at the behest of the House itself and the Sergeant of Arms to effectuate these kind of arrests. I mean, it specifically empowers the attempts to break this kind of quorum breaking. So it's all legal under Texas, and it goes to the prudence of it. My guess is once they step foot back into Texas, they will be arrested. They'll be brought to the legislature, and they'll be paying fines. I mean, I think that's just the reality, that they're going to have to pay for this. And then if they're funding it some other way, other than out of their own pockets, they have issues with bribery. So it's a dicey situation for the Democrats, and the law was set up to give strength to the ability to break this kind of quorum breaking. So we'll see how it plays out.
And then just as a political matter, Richard, I mean, Democrats they're trying to do this to stop the votes from being taken on this map. But realistically, is that going to happen? I mean, at the end, how does this end for Democrats? And, will they be able to stop this? Or you mentioned the Wisconsin effort. I mean, that, Democrats made a big show, but at the end of the day, they still ended up not getting what they wanted. So how does this one end?
I think it'll be the same. I mean, I think it'll be hard for them not to get back there. I think it starts undermining their position as sitting representatives. So we'll see how it plays out. My guess is they'll eventually go back and the vote will be taken, or they'll extend the session. So we'll see how it plays.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and for our next segment, RCP contributor Maggie Miller talks with psychologist and lead investigator Christopher J. Ferguson about a recent piece in Real Clear Investigations that takes a look at the so-called dopamine addiction claims surrounding social media. Are we really all addicted to our phones, or is that just a myth? Here's Maggie Miller in conversation with Christopher J. Ferguson.
Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. It's a real pleasure.
So the same criteria that's used to diagnose heroin addiction could technically label someone as being addicted to reading, exercise, playing the piano. How does this blur the line between genuine clinical addiction and simply being passionate or engaged in a hobby? By some metrics, I'm addicted to reading. So how do we look at this in a more productive way?
Yeah, that's exactly the problem is, with the criteria that we have right now, which were developed initially for substance abuse. So there are questions like, when I feel sad or anxious, I use heroin in order to feel better. And we would recognize that's bad, right? That's a bad choice. And what people did when they developed these criteria for what we call sometimes behavioral addictions is they used the same questions. So we had this question, if I feel sad or anxious, I use heroin to feel better. Okay, we admit that's probably not a good sign. But now we're like, if I feel sad or anxious, I read books to feel better. And it's the same question. And it's being used to diagnose people with, quote unquote, addictions to other things, whether that's video games or social media or, exercise or shopping or things like that. And it's not really clear that those symptoms work in the same way as they do for heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine. And what we really want to know is if we're worried about people overdoing things like, shopping or exercise or video games or whatever it may be, is who really has a clinical problem. And with this set of questions, we just don't know. And there actually are research papers at this point that show that using these criteria, that you're not able to distinguish who has a real problem with something versus someone who really is just passionate or engaged with that thing. So it's really difficult to figure out who might really have a problem we need to address.
I mean, critics argue that the dopamine narrative oversimplifies human behavior, kind of as you were just touching on. So what deeper concerns do you think are being ignored in this conversation? And can you also explain the importance of the fact that we're looking at this with regards to dopamine itself?
Yeah, so dopamine is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter in the brain. It's involved in a lot of different functions. How it came to be kind of associated with this whole idea of like dopamine hits and that kind of narrative is that when you take particularly stimulant drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine, those kind of like shoot up the activity of dopaminergic systems like 1,300% of what is like the normal baseline. So that's a massive increase. And that's an increase you don't see from things like video games or social media or pizza or reading a book or anything else, really. It's really very unnatural. And that does essentially long-term damage to those systems, physiological damage that is, visible, to these individuals. And that's not something we see from, again, shopping or exercise or video games or social media. So there's like a kernel of truth to the whole narrative around dopamine, but people really got misled and mistook what was actually happening, with those systems. The reality is with dopamine, the stuff that we get from, social media or shopping or exercise is very, very normal. It's very, very natural. You want this, we're supposed to feel excited about things, from time to time. You don't run out of it. You don't become addicted to things because you're experiencing it. Even if you're using something like a video game for 8 hours, it doesn't mean that you're becoming addicted to it. It's just like if your kid's having a good day with friends for 8 hours, it's exactly the same thing. They're releasing exactly the same amount of dopamine, over the same exact amount of time. It's just a normal process. And I think that, this sort of narrative around dopamine has been used to give a kind of sciencey veil to these kind of moral panics around particularly, technology. And I think, to your question about like what is being ignored, I mean, I think a classic example are these like smartphone bans in schools. American schools have real problems, in them. They're not functioning super well. And I think schools are at this point using the sort of blame game of sort of blaming smartphones for lack of student success for some students in order to ignore real problems that's happening with the schools themselves.
So is this just a misuse of the term addiction, or do you see it as part of a broader cultural tendency to demonize popular trends, like your article stated with comic books in like the 1950s? Like how, like, is it that, or is it just, we were using this word wrong?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're using the word wrong. So, I mean, we always used it kind of colloquially anyway, right? I mean, yeah, I say I'm addicted to chocolate, and I don't mean that like literally like heroin, sort of thing. So there is this kind of casual use of the word addiction. Unfortunately, that's caused a kind of a blurring with sort of like the clinical use of the term, which is mostly related specifically, again, to substance abuses like alcohol or heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine. There's really no corollary to sort of these like behavioral overuse disorders. There's no tolerance or withdrawal from shopping, or exercise or video games or anything of that sort. So absolutely, I think the way we've used this term has really confused people, quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, it essentially is used, I think, in many cases to stigmatize activities that particularly older adults don't like, So, I mean, you can go back to the 1940s and find science papers on radio addiction, So there is this kind of like generational pattern over and over of, mostly older adults, sometimes some younger adults too, but mostly older adults who are just stigmatizing whatever the kids are trying to do today. So whether that's radio or comic books or Dungeons and Dragons or rock music. Ozzy Osbourne, who just died recently, was sued at least twice for supposedly causing teens to commit suicide, for instance, and nobody thinks that about Ozzy today. He's a hero now, apparently. But now, of course, with video games and social media, we're basically seeing the same pattern. So, and we don't learn from history very well for some reason.
Definitely. I agree. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on today. I do appreciate it.
That was Maggie Miller in conversation with psychologist and writer Christopher J. Ferguson. You can see more of Maggie's interviews on the Real Clear Politics YouTube channel and at realclearinvestigations.com. That's our program for today. On behalf of everyone at RCP, thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening.